The morning sunlight streams through the stained glass windows of the historic Wellington Courthouse, casting jewel-toned shadows across Judge Sarah Thompson's mahogany desk. Her morning routine, usually marked by case file reviews and coffee, takes an unexpected turn as her phone buzzes with messages from colleagues sharing a viral video. Sarah's finger hovers over the play button, her judicial robe rustling as she leans closer to the screen. The video opens to the pre-dawn quiet of Wellington's business district, where three young men stand in a triangle formation. Their breath visible in the cool morning air, they begin what she recognizes as a Haka. The performance is raw, unpolished, but something about their earnestness catches her attention. The young men's movements, while imperfect, carry an unmistakable weight of emotion. Their eyes shine with unshed tears, voices cracking with feeling rather than experience. Traffic begins to slow around them, creating a growing circle of onlookers. Some pull out their phones to record, while others stand in respectful silence, sensing the gravity of the moment despite its impromptu nature. Sarah notices details that others might miss: the way the tallest boy's hands tremble slightly as he raises them, how the shortest one's voice grows stronger with each passing moment, and how the third student's eyes remain fixed on some distant point, as if seeing something beyond the gathering crowd. Their performance disrupts the morning commute, but there's something profound in how the usually hurried city dwellers pause to witness this raw display of solidarity. As the video continues, Sarah spots the exact moment when the situation shifts. A business person, late for a meeting, attempts to push through the growing crowd. A chorus of car horns joins the Haka, creating a cacophony that draws the attention of nearby patrol officers. The flashing lights of police cars paint the dawn in alternating blue and red, a stark contrast to the golden sunrise beginning to peek between the city's towers. The judge pauses the video, taking a moment to study the frozen frame. In her 20 years on the bench, she's seen countless cases of public disruption, but something about this one feels different. She opens the case file on her computer, scanning the officer's reports. The bare facts are simple enough. 3 university students, no prior records, charged with disorderly conduct for performing an unauthorized Haka in the city center during rush hour. But as she reads between the lines of the formal police language, she finds notes that speak to something deeper. One officer mentioned how the students went quietly, apologizing not for their performance, but for its timing and location. Another noted their respectful demeanor and how they explained they were practicing for a memorial tribute to the Christchurch tragedy victims. Sarah walks to her office window, watching the morning bustle below. The same streets that were disrupted in the video now flow with the usual rhythm of city life. Yet she can't shake the image of those 3 young men, their faces etched with determination and grief, attempting to bridge cultural gaps with their hearts in the right place, even if their methods were misguided. Her court clerk knocks gently, reminding her that morning session begins in 15 minutes. The 3 students will be among her first cases today. As she gathers her robes and notes, Sarah realizes this case will require more than just applying the letter of the law. It will demand something far more nuanced, a balance between maintaining order and honoring the spirit of cultural understanding that those young men, however clumsily, were trying to express. The courtroom holds its breath as James Williams steps forward, his university blazer slightly too large for his frame. Judge Thompson notices how he straightens his shoulders, much like a performer preparing to step onto a stage. The morning light filtering through the high windows casts long shadows across the polished floor, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere in the otherwise austere space. "Your Honor," James begins, his voice carrying the slight tremor of someone unused to public speaking. "We were watching the memorial services that morning." He pauses, swallowing hard. Behind him, Michael Chen and David Cooper stand in silent support, their faces reflecting the same mix of dignity and apprehension. The judge leans forward slightly, her eyes catching a detail that hasn't made it into any official report: a small silver fern pin on James's lapel, similar to the ones worn by mourners at the Christchurch services. "Continue," she encourages, her tone gentler than her usual courtroom voice. James's words begin to flow more freely. He describes their dormitory room 3 days earlier. 3 students from different backgrounds huddled around a laptop, watching the memorial services live stream. The sound of thousands performing the Haka in unison had filled their small room, and something had shifted in their understanding that night. It wasn't just a ceremony. Michael steps forward to add, his quiet voice carrying clearly in the hushed courtroom. It was the first time we truly understood how a culture could come together to express both grief and strength. His words carry the weight of recent revelation, and Judge Thompson notices how he unconsciously stands taller as he speaks. David, the tallest yet seemingly the shyest of the 3, completes their story. "We spent that whole night learning about the Haka online," he explains. "We wanted to show that even those outside the culture could stand in solidarity. He falters for a moment. "We didn't think through the timing and location properly." The gallery behind them, usually restless during morning proceedings, sits in attentive silence. Judge Thompson surveys the faces before her, not just the 3 students, but the court officers, the clerks, even the usually impassive bailiff seems moved by the sincerity in these young men's words. A phone buzzes somewhere in the courtroom, quickly silenced, and the judge uses this moment to reflect. She thinks about the video she watched earlier, seeing it now through the lens of their explanation. What had appeared as merely disruptive now carried layers of meaning she hadn't initially grasped. "Your Honor," James speaks again, his voice stronger now. "We accept that we caused disruption, and we're prepared to face the consequences. But we want you to know that our intentions were about respect, not rebellion." The silver fern pin catches the light as he moves, a small flash of brightness in the formal darkness of the courtroom. Judge Thompson studies the 3 young men before her. In their faces, she sees something increasingly rare in her courtroom. Not defiance, not mere regret, but a genuine desire to understand and honor something bigger than themselves. Their mistake wasn't one of intention, but of execution, and in that realization, she begins to see the path forward. The usual scripts for handling public disruption cases seem inadequate here. As she prepares to speak, Judge Thompson realizes this case offers an opportunity to bridge something more significant than a simple gap between law and disorder. It presents a chance to transform a misguided moment into a meaningful lesson about cultural respect and understanding. The aroma of freshly brewed kauakaua tea fills Aunt Moana's sunlit kitchen, its healing scent mingling with the salt breeze drifting through the open windows. Judge Sarah Thompson watches as her old friend moves about the space with practiced grace, her silver hair catching the midday light. The judicial robe lies forgotten in Sarah's car. Here, she's simply Sarah, a student seeking wisdom. "Those boys," Aunt Moana begins, placing a hand-painted cup before Sarah. "They remind me of the young albatross, trying to fly before understanding the wind." Her eyes, bright with decades of wisdom, crinkle at the corners as she settles into her favorite chair. The worn wooden seat has hosted countless conversations like this one, bridging generations and cultures with quiet understanding. Sarah wraps her hands around the warm cup, drawing comfort from its heat. "I keep thinking about their faces in my courtroom, Moana. They'd made a mistake, yes, but there was something pure in their intention." She pauses, searching for the right words. "I've seen hundreds of cases of public disruption, but this feels different." Aunt Moana nods, reaching for an old photo album resting on the nearby shelf. Its edges are worn soft with time and handling. "Let me tell you about the Haka that brought peace to Rotorua in 1935, she says, turning pages with careful fingers. "My grandfather was there. 2 tribes had been feuding over fishing rights for months. Words had failed, negotiations had stalled, and tension hung thick as morning mist over the lake." Sarah leans forward, watching as Aunt Moana's weathered finger traces an old black and white photograph. The image shows 2 groups of men facing each other, their expressions intense but not angry. Instead of fighting, Moana continues, the younger chief chose to perform a Haka. But not a war Haka, one of respect, of acknowledgement. His warriors moved with such mana, such spiritual power, that the other tribe was moved to respond in kind. The afternoon light shifts, casting dappled shadows through the swaying curtains as Aunt Moana's story unfolds. The Haka became a bridge that day, not a barrier. By nightfall, both tribes were sharing a hangi feast, their dispute resolved through understanding rather than force. She closes the album gently. The power of Haka isn't in the stamping feet or the loud calls. It's in the heart behind it. Sarah sips her tea, letting the warm, peppery taste ground her thoughts. The students, they were trying to build a bridge too, weren't they? Even if they didn't quite know how. Aunt Moana rises, moving to a cabinet filled with carved wooden treasures. She returns with a small Paunamu pendant, its green stone gleaming with inner light. Sometimes, Sarah, the greatest respect comes from those who know they have much to learn. These boys didn't perform the Haka perfectly, but they performed it with pure hearts. That counts for more than perfect form. The pendant catches a ray of afternoon sun, sending green reflections dancing across the kitchen walls. In the old days, Moana continues, her voice taking on the rhythm of a master storyteller. Justice wasn't always about punishment. Often, it was about restoration, bringing balance back to the community. Sometimes, the best way forward is to help someone complete the journey they've already begun. Sarah feels the weight of her upcoming decision settling into clarity, like sediment finding its place in still water. She realizes that Aunt Moana hasn't told her what to do. Instead, she's helped her see what's already there, waiting to be recognized. The kitchen clock chimes softly, reminding Sarah of afternoon appointments waiting at the courthouse. But as she prepares to leave, she knows she's carrying away more than just the lingering warmth of kauakaua tea and wise words. She's found a path forward that honors both justice and understanding. The afternoon sun bathes the courtroom in amber light as Judge Thompson takes her seat, the weight of the Paunamu pendant beneath her robes reminding her of Aunt Moana's wisdom. The three students stand before her again, their morning's nervous energy now replaced with quiet anticipation. The gallery has filled unexpectedly, word having spread about this unusual case. Sarah notices how James's silver fern pin catches the light, how Michael's hands are clasped respectfully in front of him, and how David's eyes hold steady, no longer darting around the room. She takes a moment to survey the faces before her, including several Maori elders who have chosen to attend this session, their presence lending gravity to the proceedings. In considering this case, she begins, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed chamber. We must examine not just the action, but the intention behind it. She pauses, watching understanding dawn in the student's eyes. The law exists to maintain order, yes, but also to protect and nurture the values that make our society whole. The judge leans forward slightly, her next words measured and clear. Your performance of the Haka caused disruption to our city's morning routine. This is undeniable. The student's shoulders tense, but she continues. However, your desire to express solidarity and respect through cultural engagement speaks to something profound about our shared future. A murmur ripples through the gallery as she rises from her seat. Therefore, my judgment is this. You will spend 12 sunrise sessions at the local mura, under the guidance of those who carry the true knowledge of Haka and its significance. She glances toward the Maori elders, who nod in dignified approval. You will learn not just the movements and words, but the heart and spirit behind them. The students exchange glances, their expressions transforming from anxiety to amazement. Judge Thompson continues, this is not a punishment, but an opportunity. An opportunity to transform a well-meaning mistake into genuine understanding. The elders at the Mura have agreed to teach you, and in return, you will share what you learn with others in your university community. David, the tallest student, steps forward hesitantly. Your Honor, his voice steady despite his obvious emotion. We would be honored to learn properly. Michael and James nod earnestly beside him, their faces bright with unexpected hope. One of the Maori elders, a distinguished man with silver hair and deep smile lines, rises from his seat in the gallery. "We welcome these young men to our Mura," he announces, his deep voice filling the courtroom. "Their journey will begin with tomorrow's sunrise." Judge Thompson observes the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Where there had been tension, now there is possibility. She thinks of Aunt Moana's story about the Haka that brought peace, seeing its echo in this moment. "This court will reconvene in 6 weeks' time," she declares, "not to judge your performance, but to witness your understanding." As she prepares to close the session, she adds one final note. "Remember, young men, that the greatest respect often begins with the acknowledgement of how much we have to learn." The Panamu pendant seems to warm against her skin, as if affirming her words. The gallery rises as Judge Thompson leaves the bench, but not before she catches sight of tears in James's eyes, of Michael's grateful bow, of David's transformed posture. Outside her chamber windows, the afternoon light paints Wellington in shades of gold, and somewhere in the distance, a tui song carries on the wind, nature's own celebration of bridges being built. The first rays of sunlight pierce through morning mist as James, Michael, and David climb the worn wooden steps of the Mura. Their breath visible in the crisp dawn air, they pause at the entrance where Koro Terangi waits, his weathered face solemn yet kind. The scent of dew-kissed earth mingles with distant wood smoke from the kitchen house, where breakfast is already being prepared. Before we learn the Haka, Koro Terangi speaks softly, his voice carrying the weight of generations. We must understand what it means to stand on this ground. He gestures to their shoes, and the students quickly remove them, feeling the ancient wooden boards beneath their feet. Every board, every carving, every post tells a story. When we perform Haka, we become part of that story. Inside the Warinui meeting house, intricate carvings watch over them, with paua shell eyes that seem to shimmer in the early light. David, usually the quietest, finds himself drawn to a particular carving of a warrior, its face frozen in a powerful expression. Koro Terangi notices his interest. "That warrior," he explains, "learned the same lesson you three are learning now. His strength came not from his muscles, but from his understanding." He positions the students in a triangle formation, much like their impromptu city performance, but this time with purpose. The Haka is not just movement. It is the breath of our ancestors flowing through us. Michael, the perfectionist, stumbles over the Maori words at first. His frustration shows on his face until Koro Terangi places a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Listen to the words with your heart first," the elder advises. "Your tongue will follow." The other students watching from the sides nod in understanding, remembering their own first struggles. As the sun rises higher, James finds himself sweating not just from the physical exertion, but from the concentration required to align movement with meaning. "Why do we strike our chest here?" he asks during a break, still catching his breath. Koro Terangi smiles, the morning light deepening the laugh lines around his eyes. "We are awakening our mana, our inner strength and spirit. Each movement has a purpose, a story, a connection to those who came before." He demonstrates, his movements flowing with natural grace, born of decades of practice. The Haka is a gift from our ancestors, meant to be shared with those who approach it with respect. Through the morning, other elders drift in and out of the practice, each adding their own insights. A kuya, female elder, helps David perfect his pronunciation, her patience endless as he repeats each phrase until it flows naturally. Michael discovers that when he stops counting beats and starts feeling the rhythm in his heart, his movements become more fluid, more authentic. James, watching his reflection in the window, realizes his face no longer shows the strain of trying to remember steps, but instead reflects the mana he's beginning to understand. The morning sun now streams fully through the windows, casting long shadows that seem to dance with them as they practice. As they prepare to end their first session, Koro Terangi gathers them close. "Today," he says, his voice rich with approval, "you began to transform from performers into storytellers. The Haka is alive in you now. beginning to grow. He looks at each student in turn, seeing not the awkward young men who arrived at dawn, but future bridges between cultures. The students bow their heads in respect, their bodies tired but their spirits soaring. As they leave the Mura, they notice their footsteps are different, more grounded, more connected to the earth beneath them. Above them, a flock of tui swoop and sing, their melodies teeming to carry the morning's lessons into the waiting day. 3 weeks into their dawn sessions, the transformation of the 3 students becomes evident in ways that surprise even their dedicated mentors. The morning chorus of birds accompanies their arrival at the Mura, where they now remove their shoes without hesitation, their feet familiar with every groove in the wooden steps. David, once the shyest of the 3, stands before the group, his voice carrying across the space with newfound confidence. K-mate, ka-mate, ka-ora, ka-ora. The words no longer feel foreign on his tongue, but flow like a river finding its natural course. CourageToRise watches with quiet pride as the young man who once whispered now leads the morning's practice with a voice that seems to emerge from deep within the earth itself. Michael, who used to count every beat like a mathematician solving a complex equation, closes his eyes as he moves. His body has found its own rhythm, swaying with the natural pulse of the Haka. During a water break, he confides in a younger Maori student. It's like music without instruments. I used to think it was about getting the moods right, but now I feel it in my bones. James, watching his friend's progress, feels something shift within himself as well. The silver fern pin on his jacket catches the morning light as he practices the facial expressions in a window reflection. Where once he saw only a university student trying to mimic something beyond his understanding, he now sees someone beginning to grasp the depth of what they're learning. Your eyes, Mama Aroa, one of the Kuya, tells him during their morning tea break. They're starting to show the story now. She passes him a steaming cup of kauakaua tea, its healing aroma now as familiar as his mother's cooking. When you first came, you were trying to remember. Now, you're starting to feel. The morning practice session transforms into something unexpected when a group of school children arrives to observe. Rather than feeling self-conscious, the 3 students find themselves naturally sharing what they've learned. David explains the meaning behind each movement to wide-eyed youngsters, his voice clear and passionate. Michael demonstrates the foot movements, no longer counting but teaching the children to feel the earth's response to each step. James catches himself mid-motion, realizing he's unconsciously adopted CourageToRise's teaching style, showing rather than telling, letting the movements speak their own truth. The children watch in fascination as the 3 students perform together, their synchronicity now born of understanding rather than mere memorization. During their final practice of the day, something magical happens. As the sun rises fully above the hills, casting long shadows through the Wairanui windows, the 3 students find themselves performing with a unity they'd never experienced before. Their voices blend in perfect harmony, their movements flow like water, and their faces express the deep emotion that the Haka carries. CourageToRise stands quietly to the side, watching as these young men who once disrupted traffic now move with grace and purpose. He sees how they've begun to carry themselves differently, not just during the Haka, but in every moment. Their shoulders hold strength without tension, their eyes show respect without fear, and their voices carry conviction without aggression. As they prepare to leave, wiping sweat from their brows and gathering their belongings, a young girl from the school group approaches them. When I grow up, she announces proudly, I want to teach people about our culture just like you do. Her words catch them by surprise, and they exchange glances, suddenly understanding that they've become more than just students of the Haka. They've become part of its living legacy. The morning mist has long since burned away as they walk down the Mara steps, but something of its magic lingers in their hearts. They carry with them not just the knowledge of movements and words, but the beginning of a deeper understanding that will continue to grow long after their dawn lessons end. The autumn morning arrives draped in gold, as if nature itself is dressed for the occasion. The community center's great hall fills with an eclectic mix of people, families from the Murrah, university students, local officials, and Judge Thompson, who sits quietly in the middle row, the Panamu pendant visible against her casual clothes. Backstage, James, Michael, and David stand in their traditional black attire, each wearing a Panamu pendant gifted by their mentors. CourageToRise moves between them, making small adjustments to their posture, though they hardly need it anymore. The nervous energy running through them now is different from the uncertainty they felt at dawn in the city center. This is the anticipation of those who know their purpose. Remember, CourageToRise says softly, today is not about performance. It is about connection. His weathered hands rest briefly on each of their shoulders. You carry not just our teachings, but our trust. The students nod, understanding flowing between them without need for more words. The hall lights dim, and a hush falls over the gathered crowd. David steps forward first, his voice clear and strong as he begins the Kuranga, the traditional call that opens their presentation. The sound echoes off the walls, carrying with it 6 weeks of dawn lessons, countless cups of kauakoa tea, and more wisdom than any of them thought possible to learn in such a short time. Michael and James join him, forming the triangle that has become as natural as breathing to them. But this time, they're not alone. From the sides of the stage, their mentors and fellow students from the Murrah move to stand with them, creating a living bridge between cultures. The Haka begins. Every movement tells a story now. When James strikes his chest, it resonates with the heartbeat of understanding he's gained. When Michael's foot stamps the ground, it carries the weight of respect he's learned to honor. When David's voice rises in the chant, it holds the confidence of someone who has found his place in a tradition larger than himself. In the audience, Judge Thompson feels tears welling in her eyes as she watches the transformation manifested before her. These are not the same young men who stood in her courtroom 6 weeks ago. Their faces carry the manna that comes only from true understanding. Their movements flow with the grace of those who know why they move, not just how. The Haka builds to its crescendo, and something extraordinary happens. The energy in the room shifts, and audience members find themselves leaning forward, caught in the spell of genuine cultural connection. Even those who don't understand the words can feel their power, can see the story being told through every gesture, every expression, every call. As the final notes echo through the hall, there's a moment of profound silence. Then, from the back of the room, a spontaneous round of applause begins, not as celebration of a performance, but as acknowledgement of a journey completed with honor. Afterward, as people mingle and share refreshments, the 3 students find themselves surrounded by well-wishers. A small girl tugs on David's sleeve, asking if he'll teach her the moves he showed the school children. An elderly Maori man grips Michael's hand, tears in his eyes, thanking him for honoring their traditions with such respect. James finds himself in conversation with a university administrator about starting a cultural awareness program. CourageToRise stands back, watching it all with quiet satisfaction. Judge Thompson joins him, and they share a knowing look. They found their way, she says softly. No, the elder replies, his eyes twinkling. They found their path. Their way is just beginning. The autumn sun streams through the high windows, illuminating the gathering of people connected not by blood or background, but by the bridges built through understanding and respect. 6 months after their first dawn at the Murrah, spring sunlight streams through the university's cultural center windows. James stands before a group of international students, his silver fern pin now accompanied by his Panamu pendant, both catching the morning light. The room is arranged in a circle, breaking down traditional barriers between teacher and student, a lesson he learned from CourageToRise. Cultural respect, he explains, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of earned wisdom, isn't about perfect performance. It's about perfect intention. The students lean forward, drawn in by the authenticity in his words. On the walls around them, photos tell the story of their journey. From that dawn in the city center to their final presentation at the community hall. Across campus, Michael leads a workshop on cultural sensitivity in the modern world. His sessions have become so popular that there's now a waiting list. Today's topic is about finding authentic ways to show solidarity across cultural boundaries. Sometimes, he tells his eager audience, the biggest respect we can show is admitting how much we don't know and being willing to learn. In the Student Center, David works with a diverse group of volunteers, organizing an upcoming cultural festival. His quiet nature has become his strength, as he listens to ideas from students of various backgrounds, helping them find ways to share their heritage respectfully. The shy young man who once struggled to speak in court now facilitates discussions with natural grace. Judge Sarah Thompson sits in her office, reviewing a report about the impact of alternative sentencing in cultural cases. On her desk, beside legal volumes and case files, sits a framed photo from the community center performance. Her eyes drift to the window, where she can see students crossing the courthouse square, the same space where three young men once caused a morning traffic jam with their well-meaning but misguided attempt at cultural connection. A knock at her door reveals a familiar face, Aunt Moana, carrying her usual wisdom and a fresh batch of koa tea. "I saw your 3 students on the news last night," she says, settling into her usual chair. "They were speaking about building bridges between communities." Sarah smiles, pouring the tea into the same cups they used months ago. "They've become bridges themselves," she reflects. "I never expected the ripples to spread so far." At the Moreau, CourageToRise hosts a new group of students, but he keeps a photo of James, Michael, and David on his office wall. Their story has become part of the Murray's living history, not just of how 3 young men learned the Haka, but of how genuine respect can transform mistakes into opportunities. The university has officially incorporated cultural awareness programs into its orientation, with the 3 students serving as peer mentors. Their journey has become a case study in restorative justice, but more importantly, it's become a story of how understanding can grow from unexpected seeds. On quiet mornings, before the city fully wakes, James sometimes returns to the spot where their journey began. The traffic flows as usual, but he sees it differently now. Where once he saw just cars and buildings, he now sees the potential for connection in every space. As another spring day unfolds over Wellington, the 3 friends meet for coffee in their favorite campus cafe. Their conversation flows easily between English and the Maori phrases that have become natural to them. They discuss upcoming workshops, future plans, and the continuous journey of learning they've embraced. "You know," Michael says, watching a group of new international students pass by their window, "we thought we were learning about one culture's tradition. Instead, we learned how to build bridges between all cultures." David nods, his Paunamu pendant catching the light. "CourageToRise told me something last week. The greatest legacy of understanding is the desire to understand more." James smiles, touching his silver fern pin. "We stopped traffic that morning to honor one community. Now we're helping build paths between all communities." Outside, a tu's song carries on the spring breeze, its melody a reminder that sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with a single misplaced step taken with a pure heart.